is Teresa at Divine Frequency, and today we are chatting with Heather Sartain, who is an adjunct professor of Geology and Physics at the University of Houston downtown. She is a technical sales territory manager in fluid power at Southwestern Controls. She is currently authoring 3 books right now, so she has lots of interesting information that she has to share with us today. And the books are titled DNA Evolution and Devolution. De-evolution. That's a fun word. How do you pronounce that?
Devolution.
Devolution. It sounds like devil. Devolution of the pineal gland. She's been a guest on Cosmic Disclosure with Corey Good and David Wilcock, and many, many other radio and live conference interviews she's been a part of. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. I have to say that I first came in contact with you when I saw you on Cosmic Disclosure, and I loved your story. I also think that it's interesting the synchronicities that you and I have, as both of our dads worked at Lockheed Martin. We're both from Texas. Yeah. We have a lot in common. So thank you so much for coming on Divine Frequency, and I really, really look forward to our conversation today. So why don't we just get started with you telling us a little bit about your dad and your upbringing and how you kind of came into this community and where you come from.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not fixed up today. This is a Sunday, so
Monday.
I'm not too terribly fixed up. It's a laundry day for me, so I just want to relax and kind of cut loose, you know?
That's what we're doing. It's all just about having a fun conversation today. So we're just relaxing.
But yeah, I grew up with a dad who worked at a few different contracts in aerospace. So the group he worked with, they moved through several contracts, starting back with Ford Aerospace, which was before my time actually. And then they moved through several contracts, all directly with NASA, lastly Lockheed, where he retired. So my dad retired when I was 19.
Okay, cool.
That was about the time when I had the most exposure to things he shared. He didn't share a whole lot with anyone besides what went on in our home and at his work.
So what did your dad tell you about extraterrestrials?
Well, he told me there were different types, and only because I asked, because I heard him and his colleagues talk about extraterrestrials in our home. And so I wanted to know, how do they even know this? Like, what about his life would enable him to know there are different types of extraterrestrials? Well, it came down to, I think, reverse engineering of the UFO crashes. That would be one way. And then his exposure to things through the Air Force and the military.
Interesting.
So, top secret information, more so in the 70s and 80s. And I think as people have retired from their positions in engineering and aerospace, several have come forward, and with that knowledge of disclosure over time, I think more and more of these gentlemen became comfortable talking about what they knew. It only takes one person to get that started.
That's true. That's very true. So how did you come to find Cosmic Disclosure and Gaia TV, and how did you end up on the show? What did that look like for you?
I had watched and been exposed to videos, articles, books through a very dear friend of mine. Her name's Rose, and she used to question my dad all the time. They're good friends of our family, and we used to get together on Monday nights, and we used to talk about spiritual and science topics and kind of put them all together. Biblical teachings, other types of cultural teachings, and how that all ties in with the science of the universe. And so we had incredibly wonderful conversations. And I think over time, after multiples of these meetings, my dad became interested in sharing a little, not a lot, but a little. And so I learned from him, 4 types of extraterrestrials that he was aware of. And that would be 2 types of grays, Palladian Nordic type beings, and reptilians, for sure. So
So you are very educated and you are an educator yourself. How do you include any kind of disclosure about any of this stuff into your classes? Do you get a chance to talk about these fun kind of fringe topics with your students?
I do within some limitations. I don't focus on it. I teach a curriculum that I'm expected to teach. At a university, I do have flexibility, so I can create my own assignments, my own exams, my own labs. And yes, I do incorporate some alternative theories in with the mainstream science that I teach. And that's how I got involved with Cosmic Disclosure. I didn't know about the show. I approached David Wilcock at a conference. I told him I'd like to just share with him some things I knew from my dad, from Lockheed Martin, and his history in the aerospace industry, and his exposure to things in mission control at the NASA Johnson Space Center. And he's like, hey, I want to put all that on my show. So I had to learn more about the show because I hadn't seen it. I didn't know Gaia was available. And I watched a couple of episodes of Cosmic Disclosure back in 2015. And then in 2017, or approximately close to 2017, I was on the show. So November 2016. Yeah.
That's cool. What was that experience like for you?
I thought it was really fun. I felt like we were just sitting there having a conversation that was being taped. We didn't have any preparations.
Cool. Well, you have a lot to share with us today. I know you have a lot of news. We talked briefly about a month ago, and you were sharing some of these ideas about your book with me, and it was completely fascinating. I was so floored. You are just so intelligent and smart, and I'm so proud of you for writing this book. And it's interesting too, because there were some synchronicities after we had that conversation where I was talking to some of my clients and some of my friends, and they were bringing up these concepts of blood type and DNA. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, wow, I really need to get Heather on Divine Frequency so that she can talk about these things. So why don't we talk a little bit about what do you want to start with? Because I know that we have like a list of different topics. What do you think would be the best to start with?
Well, I can certainly talk about the first book that's going to come out. There are 3. So the first book is going to have a second part to it. And it's all about DNA coding and how DNA has evolved over time in humans, specifically in humans. I'm going to include some support through plant and animal life as well. And then I want to, after the first book, I want to go a little deeper into DNA. So the first book kind of lays a foundation for what I'm researching. And then the second book goes into it a little deeper, explaining more about extraterrestrial intervention, where the first book just has 1 chapter dedicated to that as a supporting foundation for that topic. And so what I discuss in those 2 books, I use the first book as an example of human blood type evolution. So there's a lot to be learned and utilized in Western culture about human blood types. And it's amazing because in Eastern culture, it's heavily used. It's very important in medicine, where in Western culture, most people don't even know their blood type, or doesn't want to know or need to know either. So I'm wondering why is it that way? Because in ancient medicine, it's an important characteristic about who you are and your genetic code.
So tell us, what is so important about blood type?
Well, the human blood types have characteristics on the surface of the cell, including inside the blood cells, that are a response to things in the environment throughout time. So we have antigens and we have proteins, mainly those 2 characteristics, which make your blood type different from someone else's. And something else that's important in human nature is the fact that the blood types don't always mix. And so we learned that in the 1940s that, you know, using animal blood as well as other human blood types would cause adverse and death-related reactions in humans. So we developed research to find out why that is. And it turns out that They just, the genetic coding is incompatible. The body will see them as foreign objects and go through a series of attacking the blood cells themselves. And part of that is the pathogen-antigen response throughout evolution. So let me just go through a series of examples. For instance, O negative could have, and according to science, probably was the first blood type among the human race. And it lacks the antigens A and B. So that's the, if you have an O blood type, whether it's positive or negative, that is the absence of the A and absence of the B antigen on the surface of the red blood cell. So antigens are a response to a pathogen. Science doesn't know what the pathogen was that would develop the evolution for the DNA coding to prompt these antigens. So we can assume it was some type of disease or response to something viral. And the presence of a positive or negative blood type is the presence or absence of a protein on the surface of the cell.
Okay, pause really quick. Let me get caught up with where you are. So in the beginning, the very first blood type on the planet allegedly was, what was it again?
O negative.
O negative. And this did not have any antigens to pathogens, meaning it did not have any kind of like, I guess, resistance to a pathogen entering the bloodstream. So any kind of diseases that would come into the bloodstream. It was like pure blood without any kind of response.
Well, that's not necessarily true. There's still antigens present, but these specific antigens of A and B.
Okay, and so what are the antigens of A and B?
Other than knowing that they are a type of antigen, we don't know what response they are to what disease. Those are the blanks that we haven't filled in scientifically. There's probably some speculation as to what viruses or diseases were present at those times on Earth, but they're not present now.
So if we don't know what A and B really are, then why is it so important that when we get our blood types, it's like, oh, this is, what are the blood types? It's like O negative, and then there's like A, B positive or negative. Can you walk us through that really quick?
Sure. There's O negative, there's O positive, there's A negative and A positive, B negative and B positive. There's AB negative and AB positive.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you have AB positive, for example, you have all the genetic coding for the A and B antigens on the surface, and you also have the positive protein. So you have all of what the other blood types have or don't have. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So you have O negative all the way on the spectrum to AB positive.
Yeah. So if you're AB positive, you're actually a universal receiver.
Okay.
So you can receive any of the other blood type combinations. You could receive A negative, you could receive O positive, you could receive any of the other blood types, and it would not have an adverse reaction in your body.
Okay. So it's basically like saying there are all different kinds of people with all different kinds of blood types. Some people with a particular kind of blood type can receive any of the other blood types, or depending on where along the spectrum they are, can receive certain types of blood type. It's like it goes in one direction, but doesn't go the other, from one side to the other of the spectrum, from O negative to AB positive.
Kind of. That's very a similar way to put it. If you're O negative, that's the blood type that I have. It's 15% of the population is considered rare. It's not as rare as AB negative, but it is a rare blood type. And we can donate to anyone. So I donate blood regularly because anyone else can receive it. And but we can't receive any other type but O negative. So if that makes sense, if you're O negative, you have the absence of A and B antigens. You also have the absence of the positive for the protein that has genetic coding for rhesus monkeys, by the way. That's why there's an attribution to primates and humans. And then if you put any other blood type in a O negative, it'll be rejected by the body as a foreign substance or viral type infection.
Interesting. So I have a question. If allegedly O negative was the first blood type on the planet, what are the theories surrounding how we got all these different blood types? Was it just the different groups of people mating and
response? Well, in mainstream science, it would be response to environment and evolution.
okay.
Outside of mainstream, what I'm including in my book is the presence of catastrophic events on our planet that involve electromagnetic changes, changes in our sun, like light. And I'll give an example of that. DNA code can be changed to accept more radiation from the sun and promote survival.
How can it be changed?
A genetic scientist can change it to accept more light. I mean, we as humans are now advanced enough in science that we can change genetic code to accept a change in the environment. And so what we're trying to understand is how that happens without a programmer. And in my book,
what do they actually do to change that DNA? Are they blasting it with light, or what does that process look like?
oh, no. They change the sequence of the nucleotide.
How?
So just the genetic code sequence. It's based on observations of characteristics that we already have. So it's a it's a difficult subject to tell you how.
Okay.
For a genetic scientist, it's considered an easy process to code DNA, but to explain how we've got there through time and science, there's been a lot of observational and data type gathering. So a lot of laboratory experimentation to get there and understand. So yes, what I'm saying is, as a programmer, if you treat DNA like a computer program, which has already been done, by the way, and believe it or not, I've just come across some recent studies and publications about how scientists are probably going to use DNA coding to store mass quantities of data, computer data, text, images, charts, HTML.
So we're essentially an external hard drive.
Yes, we're like a program. It's like the Matrix.
Wow, it's either very uncomfortable or awesome, whichever way you look at it.
I think it's awesome. I mean, in one way, you could see us as robots designed by intelligence. And I think that goes back to the theory of intelligent design when we talk about the creation of the universe. I mean, there's a lot of theories. There's mainstream acceptable Big Bang theory that we're all exposed to. We still discuss steady state theory. There are people who believe in the steady state theory, which means
that one
has been the same all the time, unchanging, infinite. And there's evolution of universes. Some scientists believe that it's all about black holes. There's a death of a star, a very massive star. We create black holes, and that's just been the evolution of our universe. The pre-existing black hole substance has always been infinitely there. And so it's kind of like a Darwin way of putting the universe in perspective through evolution. So just replications of galaxies after galaxies after galaxies, just more and more galaxies over time. There's a brain theory that there's a substance that makes up the universe. Say it's ether. We've probably, most of us have heard of this subatomic ether that exists everywhere all the time. And so there are shells of that come in contact with another universe, and things happen like Big Bang. In that instance, there's a bounce theory. So we go through a series of bounces of contraction and expansion over time, and there is no Big Bang in that theory. So there's a number. There's string theory, there's M theory that describe what the universe is made of. And so we're talking beyond subatomic. We're talking really tiny subatomic particles that are a wave theory or energy theory. So as far as that's concerned, I think energy becomes matter, matter goes back into energy, and it's just a cycle that occurs continuously. But for the books I'm using a blood type analysis as an example of how evolution occurs with genetic coding. And so part of it is response to catastrophic events in our environment, whether they be viral or geological, changes in our sun would be a catastrophic change. It doesn't have to be instant, but still it changes response to light and radiation.
So let me ask a question. With all of what we have going on right now, with the coronal mass ejections and all of the crazy stuff that's going on the planet, we've got hurricanes, we've got floods, we've got earthquakes. I mean, you name it, we've got it going on. We've got northern lights appearing in the United States. We've got crazy stuff. But what does this have? How does this affect our DNA?
Well, I think radiation, and that's in my book as well, is a grand primary way for DNA to change without the presence of a programmer. However, programmers, and you can call them extraterrestrials, programmers outside of our realm or our world can manipulate our DNA through radiation. So they can remotely do this using radiation techniques. So you have to consider the whole light spectrum, including parts of the spectrum we have not detected through instrumentation as of yet. So we're limited from radio waves to gamma radiation, but I believe that there's more radiation above our spectrum.
I need to send you, I think it's chapter 6 of my book, What is Magic? Because I talk about classical ether, and then I start talking about evolution, and then I start talking about DNA a little bit too. So I'm going to send that to you so you can check it out.
Okay.
I'm really interested in your thoughts, because you have sounds like a plethora of knowledge in this. Have you ever, I know, I'm sure you have.
I wish I did.
It sounds like, well, you're further ahead than I am, girl. Yeah, there's a lot to know. It's overwhelming. But I have a question about, I don't remember the name of the theory, but talking about how there are huge jumps in evolution at certain points. So you have like a new species that comes out of nowhere, and it's like way, way more advanced than the species before. And so I talk about that in my book, where it's like, it seems almost as if there is I don't want to say like God or whatever, but I will say like a higher power or group of people or group of beings or whatever this is. I don't care if you want to call it ETs or whatever, but it's something bigger than us that seems to have a hand in changing, manipulating. That's one way of looking at it, of improving. It's almost like they're up there in their labs and they're creating whatever this genetic code is, and then they're dropping it down into the earth, and then boom, you have the emergence of a new species.
Yes, I understand what you mean. And part of that, we are left guessing through observations that we've already confirmed what's happened with the evolution of plants and animals. So there's catastrophic events, there's gradual geological changes, there's the breaking up of the continents, which separate and make boundaries for fossils that are found. So we have lined up many fossil types at the edges of boundaries together. So you can find some of the same animal fossils from the past on the boundary of one continent that lines up to the boundary of another continent. So it's like putting puzzle pieces back together. So that just kind of confirms there was a supercontinent at one time. And my question is, if you go back billions of years or just millions of years when the continents were closer together, what is the true difference in human characteristics that is geographically specific? So the further north you are, the further you are away from the equator versus how much sunlight you receive from the sun would make sense in some of the characteristics we have, and why exposure to some humans, like with lighter skin, are more prone to skin cancer or radiation cancer from that versus somebody who has more melanin and can receive more radiation and less harm. And so I kind of go through that in my book with genetic coding. And it's difficult to prove that genetic code changes by itself.
Have you talked about, or have you learned about Morpha Genetics, this concept that when you experience something as one person, you're actually influencing the whole, like that we're all connected as a human race, and that we can expand as a complete human race based on one person's experience?
Yeah, I think all of that's electromagnetic. And of course, that changes the bonding inside molecules. So overall net and positive charges inside molecules. It's the dipole moment. I think the more we understand about electromagnetic spectrum and the dipole moment that occurs within the bonds of chemistry will better explain how easy and how difficult it is to make things change. And it all has to do with proximity. So the closer your bond, the bonding charges are inside a molecule, the greater the dipole moment, the greater measurement and energy is produced.
So even though it's non-local, it is spatially dependent.
Yeah, I think that's why when people get together and they mentally focus on something, you could probably take a number of human beings that are spaced out far apart from each other, but if you had the right number of human beings and a smaller group of human beings that are closer in proximity, and you understand the energy exchange between especially the pineal gland functionality of the brain, you would see it would take a smaller group of people closer together versus a large mass of people to accomplish the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And to me, that's how science helps me understand how things like that can occur.
So are you trying to take the concepts of DNA and genetics and trying to take the concepts of like electromagnetism and the pineal gland and kind of keep them separate and write two different books on those topics, but they probably, I mean, everything's related, but you're just, as an educator, you're trying to keep these separate so that you can dive into each one. Is that kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I'm just responding to what people want to know about. And I love to study this stuff. I think it's fascinating. And with a physics background, I find electromagnetic spectrum radiation, responses to radiation to be just enormously fascinating. And that all ties into our biology. And really all of our biological makeup is chemistry. So, you know, the chemistry of everything, the bonding of two atoms is where it all gets started. And so the functionality of an organ or a gland like the pineal gland and why it gives us the capabilities that we're entitled to, we just don't practice. So if you have an organ or a gland in your body and you're not utilizing it, let's say your body doesn't really need the functionality of that organ, but you got to look at the differences of not having the functionality versus having the functionality. And so I think somewhere along the line, we definitely have, I almost said creatures. Maybe I shouldn't call them, refer to all of them as creatures. We're a creature too. So extraterrestrials outside of the Earth definitely have been involved in changes of our genetic code. And I believe they've also interfered with the functionality of some of what we have, like brain functionality, pineal gland functionality. So you have to look at the brain as being the CPU of the computer, central processing unit. So that brain organ is responsible for not only our thought processes, but how our body responds to the environment and when it's going to respond to the environment. So the firing of neurons is all electric. And the bonding between the molecules in our body, including our DNA, which is made up of nucleotides, which is made up of molecules of a backbone of sugar, phosphates, and proteins, you have all of that chemistry, and how it bonds is similar to water. I don't know if you've ever played with static electricity and water. I don't recommend too much voltage. If you've ever played with water, you find out really quick that it has an overall positive net charge and is attracted to electrons. And
so
when is that attraction? You can just turn your faucet on, like really low, so you have a small, thin stream of water, and take a soda straw or PVC pipe or something plastic and just rub electrons on it using a dry cloth, and you can make the water move. And I think when we play with things like that, that's something everybody can do at home. You can show your kids. Kids are fascinated with the bending of water. It's not something you see all the time or observe all the time. So if you play with that water and those electrons that you just put on the surface of something, you notice there's an attraction. It's electric and magnetic and has a dipole moment that's pretty strong. So you actually are witnessing magnetism and electricity at the same time that we call the electromagnetic spectrum. And it's the force. So you don't even have to be that close to the water, the more electrons you have. So you put a lot of static on, say, a balloon or a plastic piece of pipe, and you can just get just in the vicinity of the water and it starts moving, and you're like, wow, there's that much force involved in this experiment? I would have never dreamed. And so it's the hydrogen bond in the water that's very similar to the DNA bonding. So if you research on DNA, you find out that the bonds are weak, but they're prevalent. There's a lot of them. And what is the basis of most of the DNA molecules besides carbon is hydrogen. So the makeup of our bodies, hydrogen being the most abundant element in the universe, we've got a lot of hydrogen in us, plants and animals.
So going back to that example of electromagnetism, as a physicist and your background in physics, what are the implications of that? And when you start thinking about like the cabal, or you start thinking about how we can, as any group, utilize this force that you talk about, tell me how high up it goes. How big does it go when you start imagining how we can harness this power?
How big? I mean, very big. I mean, we can call it free energy. The way we can manipulate and utilize what's already there, it's not a matter of creating energy that we can use to move something, such as motors or, you know, something that provides convenience to us, but it doesn't have to be so costly. I mean, there's energy everywhere all the time that can be harnessed, and it would require less work involved to get it to move. So to utilize and harness that energy would take us away from everything we do right now. And I'm talking the use of hydrocarbons mainly, and coal. So we've always had the energy available to us. It's just, how do you justify selling it? It's so cheap.
That's pretty controversial, Heather. I don't know if we can put that on Divine Frequency. Just kidding.
It's very similar to the pharmaceutical industry. There's lots and lots of chemistry out there. There's a lot of synthetic chemistry in the pharmaceutical industry. When I talk about the pineal gland on other shows, I've described using melatonin as a supplement to help you sleep, and to be really careful with choosing melatonin, because synthetically made melatonin is really not that healthy for you, and we don't know how to dose it. And that's why it's banned in Europe to be just freely sold on the shelf. It's like buying aspirin here. You can go buy a bottle of aspirin right off the shelf. You don't need a prescription, but something like melatonin should need a prescription, in my opinion, because it is dangerous.
Before we get into, sorry, I'm trying to keep us, I know you have so many interesting things to say. I want to go off on so many tangents, but I'm trying to rein it back in. So let's go back to DNA. And can you tell us a little bit about, you were talking about ET experiments on DNA. We'll just say ETs, you know, it's a blanket term, but it could be anything, just experiments on DNA. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
What I'm going into in my research for my book is I'm drawn to explaining an opinion that I have. And I want to support that opinion with scientific evidence as much as I possibly can. And I want to show you what's behind my opinion. So it's sort of like a hypothesis that I have, that a lot of what we are experiencing in our evolution of, say, our brain and our DNA has to do with extraterrestrials turning it on and turning it off. And so it's there. It's always been there. We have what's called junk DNA. We also have a large portion of our brains that's not being utilized. When they say, oh, you only use 10% of your brain, there is truth to that. And I'm trying to support, there is a reason that we have this chemistry available to us and it's not being used. And why would it be there and have never been used? I don't think there's any case to that. I think it's been used in the past. There's been ancient civilizations that have had it turned on and utilized it. And so we've got to figure out, if they're not going to turn it on for us, how do we turn it on for us?
So you're talking about components of our DNA that we don't have activated, but at some point in our lives, they're activated through whoever these beings are that are putting and what are these qualities, and where is this stored in the DNA? It's just somewhere in the coding. And I guess you're talking about junk DNA. So there's like a lot of junk DNA that we don't know what it is. And so you're saying we don't know what it is, but it's just not being used, and then it can be activated?
Yes, activating code to be used like running a program. It's kind of like the programs in your computer. You can have some in the background that are running. You can have some that are present that are not running, and you can have programs that are currently in use. So
makes a lot of sense. So you're talking about, and a lot of people recently have been experiencing what they're calling downloads, where they're all of a sudden getting these like, and I've had 2 of the biggest downloads of my entire life in the last 2 weeks, where it's like, it's so overwhelming that you're kind of like, I was curled up in a ball on my bed because it was like so much information coming into my head all at once. It was like my whole life was clicking into place, and I was starting to see my path and understanding why all of the things in the past in my life were as they were. And I was having all these realizations. Everything was just starting to make sense. It was so overwhelming. Would this be something that you're describing as maybe parts of my DNA were being activated?
well, a download of information is happening through your pineal gland. And so in your own personal experience, are you receiving the downloads while you're sleeping, or while you're awake, or both?
While I'm awake.
Okay. So your pineal gland is active even during daylight hours. And it's a transmitter as well as a receiver. And it also produces hormones that help you sleep after the sunlight goes away around you. So it's in response to the radiation produced by our sun, and our local star produces all kinds of types of radiation, even those that we cannot see and the visible. So your pineal gland is designed to react to not just visible light, but also ultraviolet light and short wavelength and longer wavelength radio waves. But those waves of the electromagnetic spectrum are always present. Where the visible part of the spectrum that we respond to with our regular eyes and our pineal gland becomes absent at night. So you can receive downloads, transmit information, receive information anytime. It's just for a lot of us, it's at night while we're sleeping. And so part of that can be dream state, visualizations that you may or may not recall after sleeping, but we all have them. And part of those downloads is coming through transmissions of code, but those codes are light code, and those are photons. That's not the makeup of DNA.
Okay, so these are 2 completely different things. You have the DNA activation, which is occurring on a DNA level, and then what I described as downloads, that's more like receiving something into your pineal gland.
Yeah, so information downloaded through the pineal gland would come, I'd say, be piggybacking photons. So photons are subatomic particles, just like electrons are subatomic particles. But in this case, we're receiving information on photon energy versus the energy that exists in our DNA coding, which is bonding through charges. And the bonding is actually the proximity of one electron to the other electron in another atom.
Okay, so then what is this DNA activation then? Tell me about that.
So DNA changes occur actually based on the bonding and lining up of the nucleotides, which are made of amino acids. So DNA is an acid, and anything that's an acid has more hydrogen. So that's why there's a lot of hydrogen weak bonds that make up DNA. And so to change that, you have to actually do gene splicing. As a genetic engineer, you can change the code inside an animal. There can be undesirable changes as well as desirable changes. And so what we want to accomplish if we do genetic engineering is have better, healthier bodies. But they don't always replicate the way we want them to. So you might create a change in the code, but is that code going to continuously replicate inside the cell? So that's what's being worked on in genetic engineering with plants mainly, because one of the biggest concerns in industry is agriculture. And that's why there's so many changes with genomic material inside plants. which, you know, a lot of us are weary of that, right? So we don't want to eat plants that are genetically re-engineered by humans because we don't trust the intelligence behind it and what the changes in the molecular structure can do inside our body. So with that, in my book, one of the things I'm trying to support my opinion on is that changing the code of a living creature, whether it be plant, animal, bacterial, or human, requires a programmer to make that process change. You have a computer, you have software inside your computer. Do we have software programs that can be changed? Yeah, we are the ones that change them. Can we create and design a robot or a software program that can make changes without us? Yes, you can program something to make changes in something else. A lot of the extraterrestrials that are present are robotic in nature and designed by other extraterrestrials. So they're different. There's two main different types of extraterrestrials. There's pre-existing, which is very difficult to extrapolate back how they got started. But with their extreme intelligence, they have designed robotic, intelligent aliens, such as the Greys being robotic in nature. And a lot of times these abductions, you hear the stories and you hear the memories of the abductees, and they keep describing these Greys over and over in picture. And my dad told me those were robotic design.
I thought that was really interesting, and that was the first time I heard that when I was watching your show on Cosmic Disclosure, where your dad described them as being robots. That was really interesting. So are you suggesting that people are being abducted and their DNA is being activated by these extraterrestrials, but then you're also suggesting that we can activate our DNA ourselves? And if so, how do you do that? And what does that even look like?
Okay. How we can do it is an extreme practice in using your pineal gland and your thought processes. So I think that the thought processes of our ancestors and their response to things that happened throughout their life had impacted the DNA coding inside their bodies, giving rise to slight changes in characteristics. And I think if we practice not trusting our thoughts, and if we practice not trusting controlling what happens around us through our thought processes, that can carry on through the genetic code to our offspring. And so what we need to work on today is accepting that we have capabilities of controlling what happens around us. And so we refer to that as manifesting. Manifestations are changes in your life that are totally dependent on you and how you respond to things that occur.
Really quick, I want to make sure we're defining what DNA activation is. So what it sounds like you're indicating is that a DNA being activated means that you're approaching your, basically your highest, your best, greatest version. So like superhuman capabilities at the top end, right? So is that what you're saying a DNA activation would mean?
Well, activating additional DNA that's not running in the program in our bodies would enable us to have more characteristics or stronger characteristics that are already present. So you may have an additional characteristic that you didn't have before, but I don't think all of these or most of these characteristics are visually seen.
Do you think that this is overlapped where you have a lot of people, you know, we're going into this new space, this new energetic space on the planet, in the cosmos. So our pineal glands are being activated by more electromagnetic light, more frequency, and then this is causing DNA activation so that we're able to reach a higher plane of existence?
Well, if you use your pineal gland and allow its functionality to become more robust or more, the higher performance would come from removing toxins that inhibit its abilities, as well as practicing the use of it. So through things like meditation, for instance. If you practice meditation, you are actually using your third eye more. And so the more you use it through meditation, the more functioning it's going to have. It's, by comparison, you can make your heart stronger. through exercise and better diet, you can allow your heart to function at a higher performance versus a lower performance. It's the same with all other organs in the body. Less exposure to toxic substances. For the heart, that would be, more cholesterol in the arteries, inhibiting its ability to pump and the force behind the heart pumping. So you want to, instead of inhibiting the force, you want to allow it to flow more freely by doing things that enable your cardiovascular system to work at a higher performance. Well, for the pineal gland, unlike the heart, a higher performance means removing toxins that inhibit it, like fluoride, and practicing the use of it more. Like for the heart, it would be exercise. Well, to exercise the pineal gland, you have to do that through meditation.
Can you break down the definition of the pineal gland and explain its function?
Sure. It's a gland that's centered between the two hemispheres of the brain, and it's located towards the spinal connection, and it's between your eyes. So if you wanted to locate it, like its location by looking at someone's face, it's pretty much right between the eyebrows. And so that's between the two hemispheres of the brain. It works and functions similar to our eyes, except that just our eyes can just see the visible part of the spectrum, where the pineal gland can see other parts of the spectrum. That's why you can visualize things in your mind. If you close your eyes or you're relaxing or meditating and you can visualize scenarios, objects in your mind, your pineal gland is your imagination. And so it has the ability to see things without the presence of visible light. And so to heighten its functionality, that it has water present inside the organ. There is fluid, just like your eyeballs have fluid inside them. It has rods and cones, similar to the eye, but it's higher functioning on shorter wavelength radiation. So unlike radio waves, which can be interfered by buildings, the presence of other waves, other types of matter on the earth, all waves of the electromagnetic spectrum are at the same speed in the vacuum of space. But the higher intensity ones, like X-rays and gamma radiation, are higher intensity to penetrate all things of matter. So our pineal gland is designed to accept transmissions that come from really far away and the ability to decipher the information. So that's why you want the organ to be healthy. And so that describes a little bit of its anatomy. In addition to that, if we were to look at a pineal gland, if you dissected a brain, they're very small. They can range in size from person to person, but typically they're about the size of a grain of rice to a small, like BB size, like maybe a 1/2 millimeter or smaller. And when they're not calcified, they're larger. And so the calcification process kind of, relieves some of the fluid tissue inside the pineal gland and replaces everything with calcium phosphates.
So can you tell me, with your education background, your background in academia, is this information about the pineal gland, is this taught in schools?
No.
And why not? Why?
It's a difference in cultures. If you went to school in the Eastern culture, you'd probably learn about it more. In Western culture, there has not been. Here, I'll tell you what I have read, and I'll tell you what my opinion is. I have read the reason that Western medicine has not studied the pineal gland extensively is because they didn't, in a nutshell, they didn't know it was there. They didn't know what its function was. And so as much as we have deciphered the functionality of our brains, especially for psychology, how can they be skipping over the pineal gland? Don't tell me it's because it's too small. And I'm not saying that's what I've read. I'm just like, I research things and I'm like, don't tell me it's because it's too small. We've studied things a lot smaller than that organ. So what they're basically saying is we didn't understand its what happened?
Oh, you're still here. I still have you.
Okay, well,
you can't see me anymore. I can still see you.
Okay, as long as you can see me, I guess. I have a white screen over here. But, in the case of the functionality of the pineal gland is really the better excuse among westernized medicine as to why it's not been taught in medical school or focused in medical school, is they didn't understand its functionality, or if it was even a necessary gland. But later on, it transpired through several psychologists, psychiatrists, because they also have an MD, but psychiatry started involving the pineal gland more in their studies because it's the responsibility for the production of melatonin. And then around the 1960s, melatonin became interesting in medical science. So it was very important to find out the lack of melatonin versus, more or extra melatonin and how that affected sleep patterns. And so that prompted the production of selling melatonin in westernized medicine to help people sleep. But what's really needed in our culture is higher functioning pineal glands so that you produce more melatonin naturally. And so meditation really helps with that. A better, cleaner diet, especially high in green substances like wheatgrass and algae, helps with the functionality of cleaning up the toxins present in the pineal gland and then not taking in additional toxins.
So the pineal gland produces melatonin, and doesn't it also produce, what is it, dioxymethyltryptamine, DMT?
Yes, DMT. So that's still under debate, especially in our culture.
Okay.
If the pineal gland really does produce it, and when does it produce it, and how much. So that's been extensively studied in a small, narrow area of science. So there hasn't been a lot of folks that have studied dimethyltryptamine, but they do agree that it might be coming from the pineal gland. And I think the comparison they're trying to make is you find it in the plant kingdom, you find it among other animals. There's a production of it, and it seems like a lot of life forms. So it's not human specific. So the functionality of that chemistry being present, is it responsible for dreams? Because we thought melatonin was responsible for dream state. But there has been some studies done with near-death experiences, as well as upon death, production of DMT that is in large quantities. So if there's a way to repeatedly connect production of DMT upon death or near-death experiences and see that repeatability over and over, that would prove that that chemistry is responsible for what we visualize, what our brain is seeing, what our third eye is seeing when you approach death.
Could it be like a spiritual lubricant? Almost like leaving, like helping that soul eject out of the physical body?
I see it as the scientific explanation to what's going on spiritually.
So DMT, let's just say if it is produced in everyone, like before they die, right before they die in large quantities, what would be the purpose of that then?
The purpose of the chemical?
Yeah.
It would affect the functionality of the pineal gland. It would trigger to turn something on at its highest capacity. But to explain the chemical bonding that's occurring, what part of the pineal gland is being activated with the presence of DMT, I can't tell you that.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought, like an interesting question. Like, what if there is a chemical or a hormone that's being produced in large quantities at the moment of death? Like, why? What is that doing? What's the purpose of that in the body, in the human body? Okay, cool. What else do we have? Okay, so you were talking about fluoride, and I did have a question about that, because it seems to me if we've got the pineal gland that we don't really talk that much about in around here in these parts. We don't really talk about it much in mainstream, but then you have this concept of like fluoridization of so many things, of water, of everything. And then it's like, if that is hindering or calcifying our pineal gland, like what's the deal here, Heather? What is going on?
Well, part of it, fluoride is a halogen, just like bromide, just like if you look at salt, okay? Sodium chloride is a wonderful and popular example of ionic bonding. So you have a halogen and you also have a metal, and the metal is the sodium and the chlorine is the halogen. And if you look at a periodic table and you look at the section of halogens, they love to bond with things like hydrogen. So that's why hydrogen and fluoride like to bond. And with that type of bonding, you have an affinity or a liking for the presence of fluoride. And so fluoride just is a catalyst that kind of helps calcium get into the pineal gland. And so calcification means deposits of a mineral that we call calcium onto the organ, so it turns it into bone. And believe it or not, if you get a brain scan, you can see the pineal gland. I personally would like to get a brain scan just to see how calcified mine might be. And you want to hear something kind of funny? In westernized medicine, doctors will say that they like the calcification of the pineal gland because it's a reference point in the brain for them to kind of help them navigate through the rest of that image.
Wow.
But we don't want it calcified. The less calcification there is, the better. And so I think in our culture and our medicine and the control that the pharmaceutical industry has over the amount of money that's coming through that industry, the less we focus on the pineal gland, the more justification we have for expensive medicines. Because you can heal yourself. And one of the ways you can heal your own body is you can control how genetic code responds. So basically, I'll give an example of a disease that's prevalent, which is cancer. Cancer is the replication of a cell inside the body that has been modified and loses proper functionality, and a bunch of those cells together creates a tumor. And so, yes, we have tumors that are not cancerous, and we have tumors that are cancerous. And the presence of cancer literally means I've got a modified cell that's going to keep replicating, and the predominance of that DNA code is there and will continue to do so until something inhibits it. And a way to inhibit cancer and create an environment where cancer will not thrive is through your thought processes, through the pineal gland, and how that affects the communication to all the cells in the body. So with the gland being a transmitter and a receiver, it has the ability to transmit messages to how DNA code is going to remain or change. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And what was your question? I hope I answered.
Oh, no, we're just kind of, I'm just getting a basis for all of the amazing things that you're talking about in your book. So when are these books coming out, and what's the progress on them?
Oh gosh. Okay, so it's actually a slow process for me because working in industry and in academia takes up a lot of time. I'm also a mom of 2, so I'm dedicating time when I have the time to writing, and I'm trying to train myself to write a little bit at a time, because I think that's how I'm going to finally finish, is if I take this project and I devote a little bit of time as I go versus trying to make an enormous amount of time to get it all done at once. I think I'm doing better. And I've progressed through several chapters now. I'm still not to my ET chapter, which is towards the end of the book, but I've decided, well, I think 8 or 10 chapters in the first book is going to be a really good foundation, and then about the same 8 or 10 chapters in the second book.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I'm so excited for you. What I'd love to do is have you on some more where we focus on just one topic, like where we just tackle pineal gland and just talk about that. Or, let's see. I'm thinking that there were a couple other questions though that I did have, because I know we've been sort of jumping around, but I did want to know, theoretically speaking, why would ETs want to mess with our DNA? Why would they do experiments on us? Why would they abduct us and do experiments?
Well, because I think a lot of our existence has to do with old DNA manipulation from the past. And if it's true that we were designed by intelligent designers, those same intelligent designers are still governing our characteristics. But there are other intelligent designers that aren't necessarily wise or have a lot of wisdom that also interfere with the intelligent design from another civilization. So it's kind of like the war between civilizations out there. We've got benevolent ETs that want anything more than to kind of donate some of their genetic code to our characteristics and keep it blooming, where you have another civilization or civilizations that are interfering with the functionality of some of that code and some of our brain and say our pineal gland by introducing the toxins in the first place in Germany during the reign of the Nazis and their involvement with communicating with extraterrestrials. And that's another topic, by the way. But they are just trying to inhibit the good characteristics of that because they don't want us to branch out and communicate with the other civilizations that exist. They want to keep us kind of dumbed down in what we may refer to as a prison planet, where other ones are trying to help us branch out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love how you described that because it's almost like going back to your analogy of what we do with genetically modifying our plants and animals. Like, I know that this is kind of morbid, but it's for our benefit, for our consumption, right? So you have this concept where it's like, just let them be, don't modify them, appreciate their life and let them live and grow. And then you have, if you take that up a notch and now we're dealing with ETs and you've got your malevolence and your benevolence, you can have ETs that are like, we don't really want these humans going off planet. We don't want them superhuman. We don't want them to have these capabilities that could potentially put them in a place where now we've got to vie for a spot or something. There's so many different reasons why a negative ET rays, or not even a negative, I guess is a bad word. I don't like to use the word negative, but the a-holes is a better word, but dealing with these ETs that really do want to keep us in chains, you're going to have manipulation going on that aspect. But then I do believe absolutely we have benevolent ETs coming in trying to help us rise up. And then you probably have a ton of ETs that are saying, leave them alone, let them just evolve the way they're supposed to evolve. It's like you've got probably a lot going on that we don't even see.
Well, it leaves us with the question, why Earth? Why human beings? What do we have? What is our involvement in this that these ETs are fighting, if they are fighting over us? And I say if because, I think I get downloads of information too, but I question it. It's like, well, where am I getting these thoughts from? I didn't study this. So one of the things, I'm just going to throw this out there as an example. And it's weird because I can't see you because I lost the visual part of this program we're using.
Oh, no.
So I'm seeing you with my mind's eye, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
And it's kind of a good practice. So I'm gonna end the show with you by giving advice to the community that watches this program, something they can practice every day to enhance their pineal gland.
I love it.
Before I get to that, I'm actually using that capability right now to the best of my ability. And that's without seeing you. So I'm visualizing you without being able to use the visible light spectrum to do it. So with that, I feel like I have received information through my pineal gland outside of things I learned from my dad. And this is not something he shared with me, by the way. I honestly feel that the answer to some of these questions is there is a very large race of extraterrestrials, may it be the reptilians. That's a great possibility. And their population, being as large as it is, are trying to work in mass numbers to outdo smaller populations of benevolent beings. And these population sizes are enormous compared to our own. So we're just a small addition among others to contribute to the light that that desires being manipulated in a positive manner. And that desire and manipulation has nothing to do with fear, and it has nothing to do with having control. Where the negative side of things, say the reptilians as being an example among other evil creatures out there, they desire control, and it's all fear-based. And so in order to accomplish that, that's why they work in larger populations than some of the benevolent civilizations. And that has nothing to do with planet size or dimensional size or anything like that. It just has to do with the number of beings that are working off the electromagnetic spectrum. I hope that makes sense.
Has to do with the beings that work off the electromagnetic spectrum. That was a lot. You're so smart. I'm trying to keep up with you.
I just hope that my expressions of what I'm saying that's coming through my mind are making sense to
yeah. Can you expand a little bit on what you just said for me?
So whenever we manipulate things, whether it be manifesting something, changing your health, changing your ability to meditate and use your pineal gland more, making things that you visualize actually occur in your life, all of that's done using electromagnetic energy. Without the electromagnetic energy that's present with us all the time, we wouldn't have these abilities. And so we're all working off the electromagnetic spectrum. So that energy that exists all the time is sort of like in a neutral point where you can gear it towards a very negative outcome versus a very positive outcome. And so all of the beings in the universe have the ability and the access to use the energy. It's just the direction that they send the energy.
That is perfect. That definitely drives it home, because that starts to generate thoughts in my head and images that I'm seeing of our bodies as the toroidal form, and we're pulling in energy, we're breathing it in, we're pulling in that source field, and we are quite literally a channel for that. And we can breathe into that and understand. I mean, these are unconscious functions that happen anyway. Our bodies are electromagnetic. We are centers for that. Our heart pumps out electromagnetism. And when we channel that, we can choose, there's polarity. We can choose to use that for love, compassion, forgiveness, and for the greater good. And when I say greater good, I mean, we need to be looking within and doing our own health and inner work, and then also being able to then use it for other people, to help other people as well. Or you can become very afraid when you learn about all of these things we're talking about, and you can think, oh, I'm just one person and I'm so small, and you get fear, and you're fear-based now, and it clouds your thinking. But when we stand together as a whole, and we stand up, rise up, and say, I am a powerful being, I am the magician, and we can all hold hands and skip together and be friends, we can use this power and harness it together to shine the light of consciousness on the darkness and become powerful as a species.
No, that's exactly right. In fact, it takes less. So for someone to feel I can't make a difference is so untrue, because that difference is in how you're manipulating light. And if you're manipulating light for positive and love type reasons instead of fear-based reasons, it's going to take less effort than it does for fear-based reasons, because love always presides over fear and has a stronger electromagnetic energy than does fear. And if there was no fear anymore, there wouldn't be any evil, right?
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you so much, Heather. You are an amazing divine soul, and I look forward to bringing you on the show many, many more times. And as you guys know, if you have any questions or thoughts, questions for Heather, questions for me, or thoughts on the show, comment below. Make sure to subscribe to Divine Frequency, and you can email me at thedivinefrequency@gmail.com. And Heather, if you'll give either your email address or your website, how people can contact you.
Well, I don't have a website yet. I need to put one up, and I say that all the time, and it still hasn't happened. But I can be emailed at Sartain, SARTAINH @UHD.com. And also, I'm on Facebook if you look for my name. I don't think there's a ton of Sartains out there, but you should be able to find me there as well. And those are the two best sources of getting in touch with me. And I want to leave everyone with a practice to do. So practice when you meditate, closing your eyes and visualizing the room around you. Start by visualizing the objects in front of you without actually having to see them in visible light. And that practice is very simple, but becomes more complex over time. So eventually you'll be able to master manifesting events in your life, objects in your life, through that process that helps you get there. But don't ever think that something's going to happen just magically, because you have to actually put in the effort and put forth your presence on a daily basis for these things to occur. So it does require work.
I love it. Thank you so much, Heather.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, bye, guys.
Bye.